first of all, if we were in a conflict test, both of those introduce, um, for lack of a better word, um, they can either be about clarity. The person is saying, well, I wanted to jump across here, and the doomsmith is like, well, wait a minute, that's got like this and that and this and that. It's going to be a high difficulty. Player says, oh, I didn't realize it was such a high difficulty. Okay, okay. So it could just be introducing clarity to the immediate situation and how the numbers might relate to it, right? That's understandable. But that's not quite the same as the player saying, I'm jumping. And then the doomsmith saying, oh, you realize that's really high difficulty. And then the player goes, oops, and then like rewinds the film. The whole jump kind of reverses. And now we start
Mm-hmm.
over. You see what I mean? There's a difference
Right.
between
Yeah.
those. One is just nothing has happened. The other one is I have initiated this action. And it may seem like a trivial thing that ordinary, reasonable people could find a way for this never to be confusing. But the fact is it's exactly the opposite. People who are trying to be reasonable with one another get frustrated when they have to talk like that. So that's one thing I'm talking about is the nature of any of these sort of clarification moments, and when actually does the determination to do something on a character's part kick in, and relative to that, when does the initiation of the action actually kick in. And that is far more murky and messed up in historical role playing than I think most people realize. So I'm attentive to that. So, okay, with that dot there, now the Adharma dot is kind of interesting here because it is of the same issue is there, but on steroids. When we do the first roll, do a havoc roll, the game master looks at the success and failure and says, okay, and talks about consequences or outcomes, basically, at that point. It is then that the player says, and it says, like in the rules, so if the player is unhappy with that outcome,
Mm-hmm.
then they say, let's take that point. And it really is the rewind of the film this time. There's no other way. I mean, the outcome has been narrated. The consequences have been stated. So we
Right.
really are going back, and everybody goes backwards, to a point just before the point of the roll. And
Right.
I know from having played the game before, and I know it from a whole lot of other games, this basically has a negation effect on effort and on investment in the role that is of that devalues play. It devalues. I mean, you chose what ability was going into it. You chose the points you were throwing into it. You chose what kind of action it was. All sorts of things. All these, and then that impacts a die roll. And then all of a sudden you have a choice again. I mean, the choice again at that point is extremely jarring. It's kind of how am I going to put it? It's a take back.
Mm-hmm.
Now the question is whether um, whether re-rolling. I mean, there's lots of questions, but here's one avenue of question: is re-rolling really what you're after here? Um, the the idea and also the statement of the consequence. I mean, after all, I can look at the split and say, oh no, it's a critical failure, and decide to spend my point or not before you narrate the outcome. That way we don't have kind of a, that's the way it would have gone narration.
Mm-hmm.
Um, And another interesting point is looking at the Adharma points. Rerolls are, as I say, it's the take back effects, which is troublesome. And so therefore, and as I say, the negation of all the cognitive effort that has gone into it. Um, and so is this a problem in play? I experienced it as a problem, but that's not my role as a consultant. Okay.
Hmm.
I mean, or rather, there was one player at the table who despised it. The second the
Yeah.
reroll came up, it was like, this is terrible. This is we played this. You know, how does the we had a ton of choices to start with, and they narrowed down into the way that we hit these dice. Choice after that point is like anti your previous choices. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
Right? It's sort of spitting in the face. The way the player saw it, anyway, the way she saw it was spitting in the face of the previous, choices, and
Right.
it stopped play. And in terms of chronological in-game time, yes, it stops play and rewinds it, and that is um, not the same as, for example, well, there's a game of mine in which there are rerolls, but they actually are. It's a misnomer. They continue forward. They do not re-roll the previous dice, and those previous dice do have an impact. So it's basically a series. It's just how far you want to push the series is up to you. So in that sense, there's never any take back or rewind. There is instead a new rolling of the die, right? That carries on. Um, and that's a very different thing. So if you had an Adharma point spent at this point, then exactly everything you said would occur and look as bad as it looked, but in terms of the points, wouldn't be so bad, right? In terms of the effect on the outcome, wouldn't be so bad, or something like that. In other words, the Adharma point could easily be a strictly mechanical thing that simply changes the uh, changes the severity of the effect. Um, who knows? Maybe if I got a marginal failure and then I spent a Dharma point, it would hop the border into a marginal success, and it would still look as bad as it was, but it was a marginal success. Something like that. Do you see what I mean, though? I mean, you have mechanics
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
work with that you don't have to change. It's
I
the
see.
question of what does that point do? Are you going to wiggle some numbers? Are you going to say it is a new roll, but it's just not a re-roll? It's an extension, a little
Hmm.
further of some kind. Um, but it do you see how it's sort of a why I called it negotiation on steroids? You're
Yeah. I see
thinking
that.
about you have the option to take back what you have committed to.
Hmm.
So for let's go all the way back to the beginning. Um, I'm I'm saying okay, it's an RK action, and the spirits are in the potential state of of rising against this corruption, or trying to repair themselves against this corruption. And so I'm saying, and this is when that environment does its thing. I guess I could be super typical RK action and just say, okay, but one of the rotten branches drops on his head, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that would be a classic RK action. We wouldn't have to bring in like spirits acting out of their own volition at all. I mean, hey, this is what you get when you corrupt a tree, right? Don't stand under it. So
Right.
anyway, that's something like that. I've stated it, and when you state the consequences, and if it were a character action, I had stated the skill. Has anything in the fiction happened? I mean, I would like to think that when I say the branch cracks above us, the branch can, give way above us, for example. I would like to think that its potential to do so is actually in the fiction. I mean, that's what an environment, RK action is. And so, in other words, it's starting to do it. And then if you say, well, the difficulty would be this, and now I know it's an RK action and it's a 6, but whatever, right? Or you say, well, the consequences are, yeah, he could, it could catch him on his toe. That would hurt him a lot. And I'm like, not his head, right? So, but the
Mm-hmm.
point is that if you start talking about the consequences, the way the rules say it right now, I can dial it all the way back. I can go back and say, well, then I'll do this instead. Well, what happened to me talking about like the branches giving about ready to give way? I mean, haven't I has the intent of the action not entered the fiction yet? Because if it has, and in my player head, it often is the case that it has, when I have chosen, right? I'm not saying how about this. I'm saying, hey, the branch is going to come down on the bastard's head.
Yeah.
And then there's this discussion where I might go back all the way to the beginning and start over. It would make sense if instead what I'm saying is, how about if the branch comes down on his head? And you say, well, if that, then the difficulty would be this. I actually don't recommend that kind of play. Right? How abouts, and ifs, and but only if that, and all this kind of stuff will chase its tail forever. And play basically stops when that occurs. That's the whole can I thing, right? Can I do this? Can I do that?
Okay.
And so the idea here that I'm saying is that in a game which is as gritty and brutal in its content as the one that I played a couple of years ago, in terms of a lot of stuff about starting characters and a lot of stuff about backstories and the whole idea that the world is getting, worse. Um, Seems to me that when and it's considering that I have all three of those actions to use, right? Vassal, RK, and character, I've got a lot of range. The effort to pick which one, the effort to say what skill I'm using, that sense of commitment is very strongly associated because there were choices, okay? If there weren't
Mm-hmm.
any choices, it would be different. But here, there are choices. And I have chosen one. And therefore, at least the intent of this occurring has been laid down. This has been laid down by me saying this. And therefore, to then give me more information, then I get to go back and do it again. It's exhausting. It turns you into sort of this okay, no, go back and strategize that a little more and say, okay, back to the drawing board. And all the creative effort, the creative enthusiasm of doing this is gone. I used it all up because what I had chosen was what I thought was I wanted in there, right? That's what I want
Mm-hmm.
in there. I want, the dog to, jump. The dog's, jumps out of the bushes and bites the guy, right? Or whatever it is. Um, and so I guess what I'm saying is the take back at that point, the revamping of the stated action is very, it's not play, it's talking about play. And I'm all for chit chat around the table, but not the kind of how about this? Okay, how about that? Okay, then this. Well, then I guess that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That negotiation is basically broken play. Your procedure should actually do play. And therefore, and if the procedure is reliable for that, I have stated this action and I'm on it. That's my action. That's what's happening here. You have, through the course of the entire manuscript, a great deal of this sort of massagey talk, right, between people. And it also goes with some of your other paragraphs. Now, this isn't really, I'm not critiquing like your manuscript as such, but I'm bringing it up only because it's relevant here. Paragraphs which are trying to convince the reader that this is great, this is going to be cool, this is why I'm doing it. It's explanatory and justifying itself a lot. There's a lot of, even in the short material you gave me, I could like circle something on every page, sometimes more than one on a page, where there's this little bit that's sort of enthusiastically, it's saying, well, you might not like this, but it's okay. It's okay. It's going to be like this, right? And a lot of it has to do, not all of it, some of it's perfectly good and needs no justification, just fucking do it. And then some of the others is very much about this um, inviting this kind of negotiatory talk about what could happen. And the doomsmith has to be a telepathist and say, is this like an awesome moment, is this is this good fiction, and stuff like that. And I think that it kind of puts everybody into the state of being drama critics and script writers, more like a writer's room, right? As opposed to being in the act of creation and seeing where it goes when things like Dyson points get invoked. So I'm not sure how clear I'm being about this. What I am suggesting is that um, the forward flow, right, of
Mhm.
the procedure, um, I think should be trusted, because you've got some pretty interesting stuff in here. Actually, I mean, we've talked about this before, but um, you've got the nature of the action itself, and then you've got points which can reinforce it either at the same angle or at a different angle, so that you could have like I had an environment action, but a buddy, assist,
Mhm.
right, or anything. Like, could go the other way. It could be any. There's 3 and 3, right? I could
Mhm.
have a character action and I could have an ability assist, right? So I mean, all this is good, but that's a lot of processing. That is, straightforwardly, that's 9 possible actions. 3 times 3. So there's 9 possible actions here going into that role. I mean, as chosen by the player, which of the 9 are happening here? And it seems to me as though the forward flow of doing so is important, because then we have no questions about whether anything started or stopped. We have no sense of talking about what we're going to do and what it would be like.